Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us. This is Mark Schumacher, the CEO of the Home Furnishings Association. You might notice a little different backdrop here where we're in the middle of our chance to get out on the road and honor Retailer of the Year winners. And I'm coming to you from Tupelo, Mississippi, from a backroom office at Room to Room Furniture, which you'll hear more about them coming up in the coming weeks. But I just want to let you know what that background is. And by the way, if you hear a phone ringing, it's not on your end, it's a business office. I got to remember what that was like. The phone might ring here, so no worries. No, you don't have to stop the webinar to answer it. First and foremost, of course, we're talking today about not just sales, but we're talking about sales training and management, which has been a subject that so many people have asked us about, and we've got a couple of experts today that are going to really help us dig down deep into the subject matter. But before we do that, I got to do some housekeeping here. I want to let you know, first and foremost, on the right side of your screen, there is a little chat box there where you can actually type a message. If you have questions, please enter them there. We will do our best to answer them. We do have a ton of questions that those of you that signed up have already put forth, and so we're going to work through that. But that's number one. Number two, as always, we record this. So when we're done, this is shareable. You'll get a link. It'll tell you where you can get to it, but always myhfa.org/webinar will take you to the entire library. But let's get to it because we got a lot to talk about today. So we were going to have three folks on. It's Carrie Layton from Furniture Enterprises of Alaska has a little store emergency and cannot join us. But we do have two folks that are going to really lend to this conversation today. First and foremost, we have Gary Fisher. Gary's the Vice President of Sales for Circle Furniture up in the New England area, and it's a very established retailer up there, more than 70 years. And then Eric Poupard has joined us before. Eric is regional manager for Hudson's Furniture. It's a top 100 retailer in Florida, and he has been gracious with his time with us a number of times. So we appreciate that. So Eric and Gary, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. As I mentioned, we have a lot to talk about when it comes to sales training and leadership. So many pieces of that I want to cut through, but let me I always like to start with kind of a toss-up general question. So Eric, I want to just start with you and then I'll go over to Gary, but what would you say, just off the top of your head, are the one or two biggest challenges that you have today, and this of course is in this COVID environment, when it comes to sales, training, leadership, et cetera? What are those one or two things that you would say top your list right now?
I think the biggest thing for us, I don't know that it's specific to this time. I think it's always there, but maybe just right now where we're at, it's more pronounced, is the idea of having a pipeline for leadership and growth in our company. I think it's been, a crazy couple of years for everybody who's watching today. Thank you all for being here. That we're lucky enough that we're in a position where growth is a real piece of what we're looking at moving forward. And there's not a more frustrating situation than being in that position, but maybe not having those people in place to be able to make that growth possible. So the idea of a leadership pipeline and leadership growth is always top of mind, but maybe more pronounced right now for us at Hudson's.
And real quick, when you say leadership pipeline, you're talking just about your sales manager, you're talking about team managers, you're talking about anybody that leads part of this process?
I'm saying across the board. I don't know that there's ever a time, if we feel we're comfortable with leadership and we're okay and we don't have to focus on it, boy, are we in trouble before we know.
Okay, gotcha, appreciate it. We'll dig more into that in a little bit. Gary, what are your thoughts? What are the one or two things that you would say right now are top of mind?
I'd say top of mind is recruiting and retaining design consultants. The people in the trenches has been by far the largest challenge. Like yourself, Eric, we're growing, we're adding stores. So just keeping our current store staffed. And then, as we all know, a sofa is not just a sofa. So the learning process of all of the pieces, the manufacturers, how things sit, et cetera, takes a good amount of time to get someone trained and up to speed.
So let's do this. This is interesting. I have such a huge amount of questions in different areas here that I think, I was going to just think that we'll skip to really the first thing that you talked about, which is the acquisition piece. Let's just start there, and then we'll get into the details about leading that team on the floor, et cetera. But Eric, what are the ways that you're finding at the moment are the most successful when it comes to recruiting new people for that sales force?
I think that we really streamlined our recruiting process through COVID based out of necessity. Initially, when we started, that was kind of a longer, more arduous process. We had a recruiter that would do a very long phone interview. We had 3 or 4 other pieces that came beyond that. And what we found was that at some point, that process was so long and arduous, people were not hanging around quite that long through that process. So we actually were able to leverage our texting platform. We work a lot with Podium here. Podium's been a great partner for us through the pandemic and beyond, where my recruiter is a bit more of an admin position now, where we're working heavily through a recruiting software, basically just combing through Indeed, getting it out there, getting to those leads quickly, getting them scheduled in, streamlining. Everybody meets with a regional manager first, so I'm the first line of defense. Then we do have a meeting with the general manager, and then we do a job preview. But we can sometimes truncate that into, a 48-hour to 72-hour period if need be. And we were able to see a lot of growth in terms of good hires when we kind of shrunk that process down a little bit.
Okay, there's a first good takeaway here. So streamlining that process. Gary, what about you?
So I would say that, the old days of, having a resume come forward with someone with 10 years of job experience in the field with a length of period of time, those days are
gone.
They've gone out the door. And I think what's important, in our industry, that there's such a huge connection between our staff and our customers. And then there's the knowledge part. So you've got to have the right balance. And in most people, the knowledge, when they're hungry for it and they want to learn, you can teach them. The harder part of teaching them is that personality, to be able to make that connection with the customer, to be able to organically, hey, so tell me about your room. What's in your room? What are we trying to accomplish today? Versus running up and can I help you kind of a selling, approach.
I've heard from a lot of retailers that it's never been more important just to really look for soft skills, because to your point, Gary, you're not going to find the person that necessarily has 10 years in the business already that really understands the business, but going for the skill set. And I saw nodding there's Eric, you agree with that the same way, just trying to find those great raw materials.
Sure. I mean, one of those things, the double-edged sword of that, not specific to our industry, is that somebody with 10 years of experience, you have to watch out because there might be 10 years worth of bad habits that come right along with that you might have a very difficult time trying to break up.
10 years of bad habits. Well, speaking of that, I want to just steer us to the area that was had the most questions for people to sign up for this webinar. And I just want to dig into it because there's some great direct questions here, and it's about motivating the staff. So let's just say you've done your good job there, you've hired them, you've streamlined your process, you got them on board. So here's some interesting stuff. I'm going to throw this one out as a toss up and let you see who wants to jump on this first. Here's a great question. How to deal with a lazy, late salesperson.
My favorite approach to that is, here's where I go old school. I like to print out have a manager print out a calendar with all the squares for each day and take out that yellow highlighter and yellow highlight all the lates. And then that way, when you sit down with them, it's not just you've been late a bunch of times. Somehow when you're able to show it and have it sort of jump out, it's just simple. We got to make a correction here. And how can we work together? Is there something on our end? Are we able to change the schedule? Most of the time it's a no, but somehow just giving that black and white visual is very helpful with tardiness.
Eric, you chuckled at this one, so please take a shot.
Sure. Well, Gary got the late part, so I'll take the lazy part. We can split this one.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most difficult thing that we have to do in leadership, right, is when something comes over pointed like that, why is that person being lazy? The easiest thing in the world is to say that somebody else just isn't performing, right? But what kind of connection do we have with that individual? And can we understand what's happening with that person? Right? We don't have just a nameless, faceless workforce in our industry. Wherever, if they're not doing good enough, we're just going to toss them to the side. We need to value these people and understand what's making them lazy. Maybe when we hired them, they weren't. What changed? We need to make sure we can diagnose and take the time to connect, to figure these things out, because it's always easier to look outside, but it's much more challenging to look in the mirror and for us to say, what can we do to improve that employee's situation to make a real difference?
Well, let me do what I do best, which is state the obvious. With the challenge with any labor pool right now, you also aren't as free as you might have been to separate somebody, or just to say it's not a fit early on. You know, you're making an investment here, so there's no doubt that you've got to at least maybe get to the bottom of that, and not be quick to just say, well, we're just going to make a change. You might not be able to afford to do that, so that's good. Okay, here's the next toss-up question. This is kind of like a game show. I like this. Do you guys have buzzers? You can click in.
First.
Here's the here's the question, and this is something I think that a lot of store owners are dealing with right now: how to deal with the demotivation of a sales team. The demotivation of a sales team. There's so many other external things going on that are causing people to be, have a little more stress, et cetera. So how do you deal with the demotivation of a sales team?
I guess I'll start with this one, Gary, since you got the last one. We're going to go kind of down that same road we went with those lazy folks, but there is not a silver bullet or a magic bullet, a one size fits all solution here. We were dealing with that recently with a store that we had here in the market, a highly productive store with the top associate in the entire company actually in the store, but morale was low. And when we took the time to get to know that team just felt disconnected from one another. And they were asking for team building. They all wanted to go bowling together, right? As kind of old school as that sounds, they really wanted to get together and do something outside of the business that they could just relax a little bit. It wasn't always about making sales. In some environments that works great. In other environments that I have, one of my most productive locations, they all want to be in the building and they want to do things in the building. They want to have events prior to their shift. We have people willing to come in an hour early because they want to recognize everybody's birthday and sing happy birthday and do those little things. Again, sometimes those are not one size fits all, but getting to know your team and just asking those questions and digging a little bit, you're able to tailor your solutions to what's going on in those particular environments.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, recently with new ownership, our owners took each store's team out to dinner. So like, yourself, Eric, our company went and spent time outside the store. But I also think it's important to know that when you have multiple locations, you have the same company, but you have many personalities or many habits and whatnot. So you have to sort of understand that it's still one company, but one store might need something that another store doesn't need. Myself, I'm huge on really over recognizing the positives because, I think that goes a long way. Let's face it, everyone likes to be recognized. We do a lot of it within our company, whether it's posting of sales, top 5 writers for the month in each top writer in each location. So it's not just the top person in the company. We're still doing a call out to each top writer in each store each month. And we do other things.
This philosophy can carry through to a single store owner as well. What you're saying is, and Eric said it really well, is getting to know your team. So, you might think that a story, we've had these employees for a long time. So to make sure that's happening, are you finding that, especially since with the last 2 years with COVID and everything, are you communicating more with your teams than you have in the past? And is that important? Eric, are you in the same cadence you have been?
I think that we are communicating more, and I think that with our scale being that we're all across Central Florida from coast to coast, we got better at finding ways to communicate when we weren't in person, right? It's really easy to be at the store level and just have a meeting in the morning and, Johnny's
Sure.
number one, and that's great. And that when you're a single site operator, that works well. That works extremely well. But when we didn't have the opportunity to do that, we had one person in a store, right, just holding the fort down, hoping they weren't going to come in and, shut the doors on everybody. It became about, we have an online platform we call Facebook Producers, and it's a private group, and that is shared company-wide across the entire company, where we can do a lot of the things Gary was talking about. We post big sales, we post finished, completed projects, we have contests. Sometimes people are they can't figure out a piece of inventory, and they'll post a piece on there, but it makes everybody feel like they're part of that same team, even if they're 500 miles away.
So you've created this Facebook community within your community. So that's, you've kind of even drilled down further on that. This is we've kind of tap danced around this, but I want to ask one more of the questions that came in, because this is somewhat like that demotivation thing, but this is also interesting. And Gary, I'll throw this to you first. How would you inspire long-term employees that are feeling burned out?
Well, I think, you know, sometimes what happens is when you do have a long-term employee, they're usually a consistent writer, a consistent on the time because they've been with you a long time. And I think it can be easy to always be focusing on the fairly new hire, but you've got to remember that, your long-term employees are, they offer a lot of great things. Not only stability, is they offer opportunities to be a mentor for someone new. And sometimes, when you've been in that, battlefield for 10 years, being able to be recognized for something like that, and hey, you ought to talk to, Mary Ellen for a little bit, or I'm going to have you shadow with, or let's go ask her, like, how do you get through it when this happens to you with a customer? So I think those kinds of things are good to.
So you turn them into essentially turning them into mentors. I mean, giving them more. Yeah, okay, interesting. That's a Eric. Do you have any thoughts on that? But that's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, that's similar to our model. When we bring somebody in after they get through, we do a week immersion training program. Usually a regional manager runs that, and then they return to their store. And everybody at the store level is assigned a mentor in that store. So, and the interesting thing there that we find, it's not always your $1 million plus writers that have that mentorship, because not everybody has that skill set. You can be a
Sure.
great writer and you can be a crummy mentor, because we've seen it happen more than once. But those tenured folks who know how to be successful, to be consistent, to Gary's point, definitely we tap them. And then actually in that scenario, we actually have a separate bonus incentive program for those tenured mentors. So they're putting their time into it. They don't feel compelled to split sales or anything like that. But if that new hire gets to a goal, then that mentor also gets a little bit of the action as well, and it tends to be a very successful process for us.
That's a terrific takeaway. By the way, for those that just are joining us here, I'm being joined by Gary Fisher, Vice President of Sales at Circle Furniture, and Eric Bupard, who's the Regional Manager for Hudson's Furniture in Florida. And we're talking about sales management strategies, et cetera. And we've already gotten some great takeaways here relating to the motivation of your team. And I think, that if I'm going to tie that into a bow, I mean, it just clearly you're increasing your communication, your connection points with your team, and all of these other things have kind of fallen from that. And, the mentorship aspect of it, the ability to make them feel that they're being heard and creating a community. So that's great stuff. Let me ask you this one, and this fits in with the motivation, and it's one of the things that's a lot of questions here about incentives. What are the best incentives that you think truly motivate the sales team? If you as a sales manager looking at that, what are the incentives that are really making the difference when it comes to that employee motivation right now, the sales motivation?
So I would say that, money talks, and I get it, but, employees still, they want to be happy. They want to feel heard. They want to feel part of a team. They, in most cases, enjoy the pat on the back, the things we talked about earlier. So I think it's really having a voice. And even to your previous question, if you're interviewing a candidate and taking that longer term employee and having them talk with the candidate for a few, that can go a long way as well from a motivation standpoint.
Eric, what do you think?
Sure. And I think I agree 100% with everything that Gary just said, is that, yeah, money absolutely talks. But a lot of times those incentives for us, reactionary is maybe not the right word, but if we're really in tune with our people, and let's say, we were offering 50% off last year, but we're offering 40% off this year during the same cycle, and everybody's grumbling about that, and we hear a groundswell about it. You can try to talk a sales force into understanding why we need to be at a lower discount, but that doesn't work. We can try it, but they don't necessarily care about that. So for instance, we're going through a cycle like that right now. So this weekend, we put out a little stack. Everybody gets 4 coupons. Okay, they can use they can use 4 total over the weekend, and if they don't use them, they're gone. One's for a free delivery, one's for a free sales tax discount, one's for a compliment, one's for, I think, complimentary pillow and something else. but being able to tailor solutions to the
Mhm.
problem is something that, again, it's about engagement and knowing that that's the thing that's going to address it. Coupons are flying already today. We just put them out this morning. I already saw them flying, and we see an uptick in morale in business. They're putting pictures on our producer's site, all those sorts of things.
Okay, good. I mean, that's great. That's great stuff. There's also a question here that said, do you, are there any incentives at all for those that have had to make that transition and spend more time on phone or web sales? Because, you know, that was one of the big shift that so many retailers had to manage when stores were shut down, was that those were the only two ways they could really communicate. So are you, either of you, finding any traction with rewarding staff related to those other non-specific sales floor approaches?
For us in that space, again, we use the Podium platform, and that it funnels through our website, and it's also become our preferred method of customer contact via text message. Right? Don't let anybody on the call, anybody who says that baby boomers don't like to text, they're lying to you. Our customers love to text, and they're doing great. Mark's raising his hand, of course. My mother still can't. Yeah, my mother still can't figure out her Roku, but she knows how to text me 4 or 5 times a day. But you know, to that end, what we really see is that we present that as an extra opportunity. That's not a separate department for us. When a web lead comes into us via that platform, everyone's got an app on their phone. They get funneled into the store that's closest to them. And if you're good at that, that's a free up. That's a hot lead coming right into you, and as soon as it gets hit, you can grab it. So we've seen a lot of success with that. You know, that platform has grown. It was essential. We didn't even we got into it the month before COVID, not knowing that was going to happen. So that's probably my win for the rest. That's probably my from above for the rest of my life on that one.
So you're not saying that that's really not sort of like an added incentive you put in, other than just saying we're making sure that we're funneling these leads directly to you through this system. That's the quote unquote incentive you're talking about here, correct?
Yeah. The incentive is, you know, if you are quick and you're engaged with our platform, yeah, you're getting more fresh, hot, qualified leads. What you do with them is up to you. If you don't want to engage, you don't have to. But the other side of that, if it's the end of the month and you don't want to engage there, someone in your store has closed 7 or 8 customers that way. It's going to be
Gotcha.
hard to sell me on the fact that you haven't had enough opportunity.
Gotcha. Gary, any thought to this as well? I mean, do you guys have any added incentivization for web or phone sales?
Yeah, so I mean, we do have, very similar to you, leads that come in that get sent immediately out to a design consultant in the location that they asked for a specific product. But in addition to that, you know, we do take web sales, and we do have someone on chat, which, you know, we learned how to do that real fast when, you know, COVID hit us, right? But since then, we've kept that going. And what we don't want to do is pin brick and mortar against web sales. So what we do is there's opportunity to recognize the design consultant so that that order would go to them. If not, the person taking it does have an incentive to close, but then there's a percentage that is sent out to a pool so that all of our associates still have earnings coming from that. Because again, we do want to, you know, in a commission environment, you want to still try to have as much team and not the they and us kind of attitude.
But what I hear you both say is that make sure that it's a very purposeful effort to assist your sales team, motivate them by supplying as many leads as you can as well. You know, it's not just the person walking in up the street. I like that a lot. So now and again, I told you these questions were fantastic. Since we're talking about sales, you know, leadership and management, there's also, of course, those times when you have conflict. And there was a question here that says how to diffuse conflict it says here, on a commissioned floor. So can you please both enlighten the folks that have tuned into this, because this is, no, listen, talk about leadership. It's not always the happy stuff and you're supplying everybody with great things and they feel great. Let's talk about that. So Gary, why don't you start this one? How do you manage through conflict on your sales floor between sales associates, or in your case, design consultants?
Well, I think before even getting into an actual conflict, you know, we as leaders, you know, do our best to try to create stores that have camaraderie, because as we know, we're open 7 days a week. Our sellers are there typically 5 days a week. And as much as we manage our clients with follow-up appointments and trying to have them come in and do all that, we know that that doesn't happen. In fact, sometimes they show up in another store location. So, there's always many sides to the story, but the first and foremost thing is the customer, and the reputation and the service is absolutely, in my opinion, the most important thing, because that's why we're here. And you can't replace any kind of visual conflict, and that can just mean no words, but just having the customer feel that tension. And that's a big no-no. So I think it's important, to hear each concern in the right environment, not in the middle of the floor. And, at the end of the day, everything always washes out. And you've got to have each of your cohorts back, because you want to enjoy, like I explained to them, you want to enjoy your 2 days off. You want to know that when you're off, that Kathy's got your back and whatnot.
But you just said something really key here. You need to plan for this long before the conflict happens. So it sounds to me like you've set it up in such a way that tries to preemptively avoid that. By what? By making sure that they understand that if there's any sort of a disagreement, this is how it's handled, and setting a standard there. I mean, is that my read between the lines on what you just said?
Exactly. And if I told you that every one of our store locations were cookie cutters when it comes to this, and they all have the best camaraderie, I'm going to be honest, it's not. But I can see that in the stores that consistently have it, that's where the sales are the highest. That's where the motivation is the best. That's where they want to pick up the Windex and, take care of the smudges on the door, not because there's necessarily a checklist. There's pride, there's ownership, and there's, the team/family amongst its own store.
Okay. Eric, what are your thoughts on this whole, thought of conflict resolution on the sales floor?
So right after I assumed this position about 3.5 years ago, it was actually something that I jumped on because, we've been around for a while. We've had a lot of tenured people in a lot of locations. And we had, obviously, from what Gary said, definitely, we want to be right there, right? I think everybody does. But it was kind of like unwritten rules, right? And it was just, well, if this happens, this is what you do. Well, how do you know that? Where is it in HR or something? No, that's just how we've always done it. Right? To your point, Mark, the idea about planning for it before it happens, we had to get ourselves something on paper, at least a framework of what would happen in regular occurring scenarios. We all know what the regular occurring scenarios are on our floors. So let's at least have a framework that's out there, that's accessible, so everybody knows. Because if somebody came here 2 years ago and was trained by the guy who's not here anymore, as opposed to somebody who just got here, you have two people that have two very different understandings of what that is, and neither of them are wrong, right? You can't fault those people. They're just doing what they were told. So the framework was huge, number one. And then number two, the ability to diffuse, to always come back to it, to not let those things sit. Just because someone says, oh, I'm okay, doesn't mean they're okay. Take the time, sit with that person, connect, make sure we get full resolution done so those things don't grow into, much larger things down the road.
I mean, a lot will be diffused just by the fact of what you guys talked about earlier, which is you've got to stay in constant communication with your team, understanding kind of where they are, sort of situation. But I'm also hearing that if you don't have a framework, plan for that outlier, that if something does happen. But you're suggesting that anybody that runs a sales floor have everybody be aware of how things should be handled should they come up. Fair enough. Is that kind of a key?
100%, right? You can't expect people to act a certain way if there's not a clear expectation. Anything that they do.
Gotcha. Let me ask this while we're talking about these things, because this is interesting that some of the questions that came in were not just from an overall, looking at sales leadership down, but also was talking about the sales leaders themselves. So there's a couple of interesting things here that I thought was interesting, and I'm going to just throw this one out the way that it's written, because I think we can all have a different translation of it. How to best engage sales managers, okay, to be company focused and not just store focused. I think I know what they're going for here, but I almost feel like that question, at least when I hear that question, I hear it's almost like a group within the store. That if it's just so store focused, then we're so insular like this that we're not thinking about the overall image and everything of the store itself. How do you react? I see that you're nodding, Gary. What is your thought about that? How best to engage sales managers to be company focused, not just store focused?
I think in a company that has stores close enough where, again, we share customers, it's important to have communication between all the managers, even our design consultants. So when they pick up a phone because they need a quick snapshot of a particular chair or sofa in their store to show to a customer, that although they don't work in that store day to day, they know that other design consultant. And, some of that happens from, store-wide meetings and Zoom training and Zoom get-togethers that we even did during COVID that were just nights of, sort of a cocktail party while everyone was at home. So, I think you have to rely not only on your coworker, like I spoke to earlier, but sometimes your coworker is in another location. And we try to do our best so that when we're sending a customer or a customer that we know is taking a trip to another store, we want to be able to provide them that store with what they're looking for, when they're coming in, where you are in the process. And, we have some safeties there. If the store manager is on there that day, then they're going to act as your cohort, right? And then if not, we're going to, the person at the back of the line on an up system is going to take care of that. So you try to minimize these opportunities, and then you also want to celebrate them. So when your customer goes through and pulls the trigger and makes that purchase, I think it's super important to let that other employee know, hey, thanks for working with my customer Sally. They ended up going with blank and blank. And I'll throw one more thing in here while I've got the microphone, because you talked a little bit you talked a little bit earlier about, what motivates them in conflict, and this sort of ties into, well, I ended up spending an hour with your customer, right? Therefore, I should get 50% of this. What I always try to tell people is that, you could go super old school and he or she that gets the credit card at that moment, it's theirs. But, half of something is better than nothing. And when you're able to go and speak back to your fellow design consultant, either in your store or in one of the other locations, and be able to have a nice conversation and explain, I really feel like this should be a split. Let me go over blank, blank, and blank. If you can say that and you feel comfortable about it, if you're not nervous, then you should have no problem, because again, I say it comes out in the wash. It's going to happen, in a reverse situation.
Okay, fair enough. We've got a couple of other in-depth questions here, and this is since we're really tapping into both of you, and you're giving some really great insights here. Let's go as granular as we need to here with some of these great questions. Let's talk about upselling. Okay, how do you find, or the best ways that you're helping to really man your sales team to really think about upselling, and whether it's also protection plans, things of that sort? There's a lot of people on this webinar that are looking for insights on that. So Eric, I'll let you start that one.
Thanks. So you logged out protection, or what we call replacement here. So I'll take that. I'll grab that one, because
Okay.
we have our most productive store right now in the company, just in terms of overall volume, is also our highest percentage of that replacement plan protection, whatever your parlance is in your location.
Okay.
The great thing about it is that, truthfully, it's not anything groundbreaking or earth-shattering, but that doesn't mean that it's easy, right? There's a consistency to a process that is adhered to in that store at such a high level that they're able to outpace it. What does that look like? 2 or 3 simple things. Number one is a dedication to being early and often with a process of making sure that we're just talking about it. I know that's hard to manage, it's hard to measure. You can do it kind of anecdotally, but if it comes in as part of a greeting, after we see what you're looking for, great. You'll never have to compromise your choices with our replacement plan, but I'll tell you about that later. We'll plant our seed. We plant our seed again, once we land on the merchandise. We sit down, we love it. Remember earlier, we told you all about that replacement plan. Here's how we're going to take care of you. When the associate goes to the register, there should be no issue about putting that on the invoice. It's already there. It's there. And then if we get an objection, we're going to bring in a different collar, right? A TO process, right? This is really, really, this is the stuff that I first learned when I first got in this business. Sometimes they just want to see a different collared shirt. That's all. That person can go in and do whatever it takes to make sure we get there. So now we've had 2 people engaged. Now we say no. Guess what? We also have a mandatory, before delivery goes out, 1 more phone call that goes out, either from our care team or from the store level, right? And that store, without fail, is the best at that process. So it's not just about dollars there, it's about percentage. That a consistent process to know that that's something there. And by the way, our people, as in most cases, from leadership down, make a heck of a lot more money when that number looks good on their profit and loss statement.
Well, what I love what you're saying here is that, first of all, it's a conditioning. There's no doubt about that. But that it shouldn't be an afterthought. You shouldn't always think about those add-ons as at the end of the sale. Like you use the great terms that you seed it, all the way through. Love that. Gary, any quick comment about that? And then I'd like you also to take on a little bit about just talking about, from a sales training standpoint, the way to really ensure that your team is looking for those opportunities to make that a bigger ticket.
Sure. So I'm guessing we're probably both adding on the same protection plan, just based on Eric's nice explanation of it. So we do the same, and to work backwards, we have that safety net, last time that you can add it on before delivery, and we do have that as a safety net. What we've also done this year, started on February 1st, our new ownership made the decision to do and add the no use, no lose policy. So 5 years, you don't use it, you come back, you get a gift card to our store. That's tremendously helped, mostly for the sellers that weren't doing it, is consistent. You have to believe in it, and you have to understand that when you get the phone call from someone and, oh, I've had my sofa for 3 years, you sold me and you said that blank, when you've sold that, when you've added on that protection plan, aha, I all of a sudden don't have a company claim going on right now. This is where you want to say, Marge, I am so glad I'm looking at your order and you took our protection plan. That was a smart decision. Let me help you through the process of utilizing that plan for you. So, our top seller, she actually got burned many, many years ago when she forgot to offer someone the plan. Something happened. Since then, she's by far our #1 consistent writer.
Yeah, I mean, and I like what you're saying, because again, the biggest takeaway for people that are tuning into this is that this needs to be something that is sprinkled throughout the process, and even Eric's point, even close on the front end. So that's a really great takeaway for people that are trying to figure out better ways for their teams to do the same thing. Anything from both of you though, on as far as bumping that ticket up? There were a number of questions here just about how do we motivate the staff or really train them in a positive way to make sure that they're maximizing the sales that they're writing.
Well, I'll say for us, we've sort of named this year the year of the room. And what we're trying to do is get more items on there. So as much as we acknowledge month-end sales, year-end sales, we're celebrating when someone's adding rugs, lamps, artwork. Our company's also invested in a buyer for that department as we're growing. So we now have talent out there that is able to focus on making good buying decisions, listening to our design consultants on what our customers want when it comes to art and accessories. So we're really looking at, if they were leaving with merchandise, can we help them carry it all to the register, so to speak? That's what we're trying to get to.
Eric?
I think for us, we've really tried to lean into the design aspect of the business. Definitely, echoing some of those things that Gary said. Our thrust of our training has gone more from just, hey, this is how you can muscle the SKU into the computer as quickly as possible, to, hey, listen, yeah, we need to be talking about an entire space. We need to be talking about an entire space because There are so many places, because we shop our competitors regularly, nobody's doing it, right? There are so many people that aren't doing it. They might say they're doing it, but they're not, right? And the idea to start with a discovery process. What else is in the room? What are we keeping? Can you give me a little sketch? To step into someone's space is a giant, average, $10,000 average ticket retailer to do that. You just have to think bigger. That starts
Right.
with training from day one and coaching as we go on, looking at metrics like an average ticket to see who's really able to build that stuff. What can we learn from those people that we can pass along to our people who maybe aren't harnessing that quite as well?
Okay, and that gets back into your little bit into the mentorship piece, but it's also one of those situations where again, if you're communicating well with your team, you're going to be gleaning a lot of this just through that process as well. I mentioned at the beginning that a lot of these questions are very granular and just spot on and very specific. So there was a question that we had that came in that said, just what are some ways, maybe new innovative ways to improve closing? To make sure that the sales team is closing the deal. Any thoughts about that?
So something we started tracking, we kind of put together kind of just a real crude tracker during COVID of like 7 or 8 really key metrics we wanted our managers to look at every single day. I won't bore you with all of them. One of them that's not exacting, but one that we found value with is manager introductions or manager touches into a sales process. And we think that it's a great way, number one, to be able to suss out environments where maybe leaders aren't as heavily involved or sales managers aren't as heavily involved. When we're able to recap at the end of a day or a week with a leader and see how many people they were really involved with, and that's a one-on-one, that's a bit of a time-intensive process, with a superior, something of that nature. But if we're going to put people in a leadership role in a store, I think everybody on this call would probably agree they're there because we believe they can be a conduit of productivity for their people. So why not let them know that I'm keeping an eye on how many of those people you're really talking to? And I love to share the success stories when they happen because people feel great about it, and then we've got more.
Well, let me ask this. This question just popped in as you were responding to that, and Gary, I'll let you take this from there to take us a little bit further in this. So then the question is when and how should we? This is coming again from another retailer. Should we be coaching? Because a lot of what we just heard from Eric there felt to me like the coaching piece of it. Talk a little bit about that. I love that. When and how should we be coaching is the question.
Well, I mean, organically, we should be coaching every day about, we call them opportunities, or customers that come through the door. From a numeric standpoint, we do track opportunities, closure rate, average sale ticket, and we use those metrics to coach our design consultants and meet with them at the end of the month and go over strengths, weaknesses, and talk about a sales goal for the next month. So the numbers are there, but you also have to have that manager that's constantly roaming and has a big set of ears that knows when to, interject, whether it's, paying a compliment while a designer's working with a customer or walking by and dropping a little rug sample and say, I couldn't help to notice what you're working on. My God, it's beautiful in this rug. I'm just going to drop it and run. So, always being there, and those are little coaching moments, but they're also little selling opportunities as well.
Okay, so I hear you saying the when and how is when is always, and how is based upon what's
Always.
happening there. Yeah, Eric, what are your thoughts about that too? Because again, we're trying to really give some great nuts and bolts to retailers that are on this call that are all about the sales process.
Sure. Yeah. And for us, I think, again, a lot of similar to what was just discussed. Our process is as twice per month. And usually what that looks like is goal setting at the beginning of a month. Right? And the metrics very similar to what Gary said, right? But depending upon the associate, the goals always change, right? Because if I have someone who's underperforming, we're going to coach them to average. If I have somebody who's average, I want to coach them to the top. If I have somebody at the top, I'm coaching them to a number I've never seen before because that's how they stay motivated. And then mid-month, we can check in and see where we're going with that. if our trajectory is good. If it's good, why is it good? What can I bring to the team with that? If it's not, why isn't it? Did we set the wrong goal? Did we set the wrong expectations? But that kind of check-in mid-month keeps people a little bit more on that path we found, because we were initially on a once per month type track. And we found a little bit more success adherence to things once we had that little check-in, just to see where you were going and where you were at halfway through.
Gotcha. Great takeaways. Appreciate that. Here's another really great specific question. What can we do to help customers when they come in with a poor attitude? Man, there's not a salesperson in our industry that hasn't dealt with that on a regular basis. Somebody's coming in that's just like, oh boy, here, you buckle up, here we go. Gary, why don't you start that one off?
I think sometimes, when you perceive that someone's coming in with a bad attitude, they may need those extra few moments to sort of decompress, because, you're making an assumption they're coming in with a bad attitude. You don't know if they just slammed the door and said, I'm not spending $3,000 on a sofa no matter what. And, in the store is the happy couple, or if something has happened in their personal life that's caused it. So I think you got to give them a little bit of time. This may be the one where that one time out of the year, that design consultant that happens to be up says, okay, Janet, you want to take this one? I'm feeling like I don't have the connection already. Or you might want to, give that tap on the shoulder to your manager and say, stay by, I might need a life preserver. So,
okay. All right. Yeah. I like that. Eric, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that that hits a great thing, something that part of our training, especially for people who are new to the business, maybe new to a daily client facing environment. That's hard for some people to take. We tell everybody that walks in, hey, guess what? 30% of the people that walk in this door might not like you through no fault of your own, right? Mm-hmm. So it's hard. Number one, we have to condition ourselves to not take it personally. Because to Gary's point, sometimes we're going to project how we feel about that customer onto that customer before we've ever had a chance to really get to know them. Right. Yeah, and then secondarily, having a culture where there's a comfort level of being able to do a turnover or have a manager involved more regularly, we'll be able to break down some of those barriers. I could bore you to death with weird stories that I've lived being in Florida, actually ending up, because somebody brought me in, meeting somebody who I had a real connection with back where I'm from in Philadelphia. That's happened on at least 3 separate occasions. Those are real things that happen because we were willing, because they thought the person had a bad attitude. We're just a little different in Philadelphia, I'll tell you that. And that's A-okay. But we need to be able to learn how to connect. And if we can't connect, know that we've got somebody there who can help us and possibly make that turnaround for us.
And the reason I appreciate both of you responding to that question, the reason I think that question is such a good one is because, again, we tie back to what we talked about at the beginning of this webinar, which is as you're bringing new people in that don't have a lot of experience in this industry, and you're looking for that, those new people coming in from this labor force that's out there, these are the types of things that if you don't brace them for that or give them some understanding of that, you're going to have somebody that, within 90 days is going to be out the door. So I think that's critically important. Another question came in, and this really, it's been 2 years worth of change, but how do you get the sales staff to buy into change? There's always going to be a new something that they're going to have to deal with, whether it's, I don't know, everything from a sales promotion to now we're going to use a different type of device to help you out on the sales floor. So how do you get the sales staff to buy into change if you're a retail sales leader?
Well, I think sometimes when there's change, what you have to think about is, are you making change because of feedback that your stores gave to you? So, you should be able to go back in and, recognize that team, that store, that employee, and that's your opportunity for, hey, we heard you, and here's what we're going to do because of that. And, that led us to realize that we also need to make a change on this item as well. So, that might, be a great win-win situation when it comes to change.
Eric, how do you manage that?
Yeah, I think a big thing for us, it boils down to one simple 3-letter word, and that word is why, right? We made a concerted effort. Anytime we're going to make a major change, again, to some of the things, Mark, you were mentioning, anything to that magnitude in our company, because of our scale, we're going to have leaders at the store level introduce it, but Josh Hudson is going to make a 5-minute why video. We got a lot of why videos on YouTube about why we've done these things, because sometimes it doesn't always translate well if people don't understand it. And the idea that we're going to take the time and say, listen, here's what it is, here's the thought process behind it, here's where it is, and hey, we're not too proud about as a retailer if we do roll something out and we believe we've got a good why behind it and it doesn't work, to be able to roll back and adapt a little bit, right? I think we hope at this point that our people understand that retail is fluid, and we're going to continue to do make those little changes if it benefits our customers and it benefits our team. And we tend to find a lot of success once they understand that we're not a rigid, it's set in stone, we don't care if you don't like it type of establishment.
And thank you for that. And I think there's another question that kind of dovetails into this that I think is also a good one here. This one came in and it said, how do I provide better feedback to my team? And what I hear in that one, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you can inundate your team with feedback as well. You can overwhelm them. You can give them a tsunami of too much stuff, and then they don't really focus. So I guess what I would just ask both of you is so how do you provide better feedback to your team members that's gonna stick, that's gonna matter? Because that's another thing that's in a lot of these questions that we've gotten in that have said, how do you get this stuff to stick? So Gary, give us an idea about that. How would a sales leader provide better feedback to the team? What does that look like?
Well, I think you have to evaluate what you want to get across. To Eric's point, what's the why there? And then also determine what's the best way to deliver. Is it a company-wide Zoom? Is it an in-person? Is it peers being on a Zoom together? So you really got to know your audience. Different ways. Our design consultants get inundated with emails. So things that come across an email could just be in and out. So you really got to take a look at the different ways to communicate with people.
Okay, Eric?
Yeah, I believe that there does have to be, if it's a company-wide initiative, there needs to be a trickle-down effect that's coming succinctly. That doesn't mean that the CEO's got to do a video, and then the regional manager's got to do a Zoom, and then the general manager's got to do a meeting, and then the sales leader, because you're right, Mark, to your point, at that point, that can become exhaustive, right? But some of the things that we like to do is maybe once we've got that initiative there, maybe we're going to make sure when we do that next coaching opportunity, right, with a scheduled one that we've got with a team member, that we know that that's on our agenda to talk about, right, and make that a talking point, right, or make sure that we as an executive team, after it comes from the top, that we sit and we share feedback about it. So not necessarily that we have to inundate people with it, but we find ways, if we're going to put forth an initiative and we're looking for feedback on it, we just want to make sure that we've got our little check-ins after the fact to see how it's being received, and to make sure that if there is that rumble that becomes more than a rumble because it's consistent, that we're willing to make that change when we get that feedback from our people. We want them to feel safe to give that to us.
Love that, and because it's really not a one size fits all. And it's important to know that you can overwhelm your team as well. So you just have to make sure that it's purposeful communication. The last thing I'd like to delve into in our last few minutes here is, and this may all be typical, I don't know, but you guys are the experts, and I want to open this up. But the question has come in from many people that just basically say, okay, what are your best go-to measurement goals? What are the things that you're really measuring in this environment today with your sales team? To really gauge your success. There's any number of metrics you can plug in, but what are the things that are absolutely critical right at the moment, Gary?
I'd say, repeat customers that want to get into, the next room in the house. That to me is, you can't buy repeat customers. You have to develop repeat customers. And, I always reference the old Breck commercial, when they'll tell someone and they'll tell someone. So to me, that is by far the best measure is, clients that send in friends, family members that want to come in on the day that you are there. That's a win.
So you do track that as something that you guys are very, very aware of. So you let your team know. Okay, so referrals, huge bellwether for you. Eric, what about you? What are the measurements that you think that sales leaders out there need to really be paying attention to most right today?
So to the point we discussed earlier about growing tickets, design is a huge part of that for us. So we do have a metric by which we can tie us actually going out and doing a measurement of a home and doing a design-based presentation to dollars sold, right? That is we call it IHD business. So that is a big one for us. It's important because when we scoreboard it, we also scoreboard our top people throughout the year. And the only thing that we put up there is their name, their store, their overall volume, and their design volume, because we can draw a lot of really good parallels that the people that are doing that are also the top people in our company. So when you come into our company and you're new and you see that and you're like, wow, I better get on that train right away, because look at what percentage of all the top people in the company's business is based on this thing that grows your tickets magically. And we have a whole school and design program to get you there. So I would say definitely that one is very top of mind for us, because it drives things like average ticket, to Gary's point, like repeat business. Somebody walks into someone's home and sees their beautiful design, you better believe they're going to be coming and seeing one of my guys or gals again.
Right. And we just added a 3D room planner. So, for us, it's providing more tools so that our designers can capture the whole room versus, a 2D drawing. And then you can take that sale and then, put wallpaper on, dress the piece of furniture, show them where they have an opportunity to put a bar card, a credenza, and whatnot. But, sometimes it's giving them the tools and them knowing what tools to use for when, because like Eric pointed out earlier, grabbing that sketch pad in that first few minutes of meeting your client and getting those good questions out of what's in the room, what's staying, what's going, those good basic questions, along with the tools that the company provides, a good attitude, good support in your store, and the ticket will grow.
I think to wrap this up, it's interesting that we started this by talking about motivating the teams, and you guys talked a lot about getting to know them and just that communication and really understanding those dynamics. Everything we've talked about today has bridged off of that, even these very specific questions. Because what you just talked about, Gary, and you did, Eric, as well, is there's some, you talked about some measurements here, but so much of what you also talked about were things that are not specifically what I would say like Excel spreadsheet type of metrics, and instead it's really looking at a lot of the organic sales process and how your team is really putting through with all that. So there's been a ton of great takeaways here. Before we wrap up, I just want to mention, by the way, incentivizing your teams is something that we also do through our partners at Synchrony. For those of you that are in the Synchrony program, and I want to mention, we're going to put this full screen up here, that they have their Ignite program, which is a way to help you truly motivate your teams. And you have to enter this challenge code for watching this. So I want to make sure we have that up there. And also, this webinar is one of many ways that being a member of HFA is a value. And so I would always encourage you to make sure that you think about becoming a member. And also, don't forget, we've got Market coming up very, very soon in just the next week and a half. Please, if you're in High Point, come visit us. Our HFA Resource Center, which is fabulous, is on the ground floor of the Plaza Suites building on Main Street. But I have to just thank you both. I will say this, and I'm not saying this to blow smoke your direction, but I will say this is one of those times that I'm going to recommend anybody that has been with us today is to rewatch this webinar, because there are so many nuggets that you guys threw out that I thought were just fantastic. So I want to just thank so much Gary Fisher, VP of Sales for Circle Furniture up in New England, and I want to thank Eric Poupard, Regional Manager for Hudson's Furniture down in Florida. Guys, it was great to really hear from the trenches and the things that you're doing that are being successful. So thank you both very, very much. And I also want to just give a personal thank you to our friends at Room to Room Furniture in Tupelo, Mississippi, for allowing me to have some office space today and a ringing phone, which everybody in sales loves a ringing phone. So it's been ringing here. So I'm assuming that just our mere presence means that sales have gone up here at Room to Room. Probably not. I'm not going to take credit for that. But listen, I want to thank, again, our guests, and I want to thank you for joining us. And as always, we always wish for you good health, great sales, and we look forward to seeing you next time. I'm Mark Schumacher. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.